no access.
I'd like to deny that. In fact, Les didn't update his passport. He was 5.5 months or something.
Yeah,
And just for everyone else's sake, so that only Les ever has to suffer this, don't do that. Have your passport more than 6 months until
actually on that thing with me, we're coming together.
he got turned around, right?
Yeah, he got turned around. I was waiting.
Wow.
He said, "We don't want to let you in."
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wonder what the expiration date's for then, right?
I'll say one more thing. Also, I'm in the EFR pad, but it would be good if some other people joined as well.
Is that linkable off the materials page?
It is. It's linkable off the materials page. I know. I'm going to start the blue sheets going around. There's probably going to be subscribers. I know. Aaliyah usually comes in about 5 minutes late. She'll be here.
Yeah, I don't see it. That's really crappy. Is it on the IETF agenda?
I got to it.
It's probably it's off the agenda.
Yeah, it's off the agenda. Is it off the agenda or just meeting materials? I got it off meeting
It's
materials.
the agenda. So, we have to do. Oh no, they did.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, we got everybody we're expecting.
do you want? Who's your note taker? Les.
Les can't do it. Yeah.
So Les is normally the note taker for OSPF, and AC is normally the note taker for ISIS. So we need a new note taker, a minutes taker. Who would like to take minutes? Please help. No one. I don't either. One more reason for not running a joint meeting is that we can't take each other's minutes. Chris? Oh. Okay, we've got a minute ticket. What? Is that Ian? Okay. Neither of us can see. All right, well, so I think we've got an agenda up here. The way we were going to run it is we're going to do working group updates for both working groups, one after the other, and then we'll get into the presentations. We just did the 2 OSPF and 2 ISIS. There were some thoughts. And if it's not obvious, we're running a joint meeting, ISIS and OSPF this time. Everybody should have been receiving mail, maybe that you didn't receive before, because the mailing lists were both combined, the ISIS and OSPF mailing lists. The membership lists were. And we, if we had a lot more, maybe we'd mix it up. The idea here is to try to get maybe some cross-pollination between the two very similar groups. It's also to reduce the replication that we were seeing with some of the segment routing stuff. And, in the past, there hasn't been as much replication, although it seemed like there might have been. There wasn't. There's been more lately. So Alia, who's not here, has been pushing hard for this. I don't know about AC. I'm sort of either way, kind of. I originally didn't like the idea. Now I'm like, okay, if it has to be, I think there are reasons not to do it. I think it can waste people's time. There's people like GMPLS. I don't know. There's different groups of people that are not interested in both routing protocols. So that's a big reason, I think, not to do it. Also, I don't know about you, AC. It hasn't made me pay more attention to OSPF. And I started thinking when AC missed his plane, what would happen if I had to run the group myself, right? Like, is it too much work to do for 2 people? I don't know. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
About a year ago, the first time they asked us, I was really, really against this.
But now in OSPF, for OSPF v3, we have the extended LSAs, and we have the prefix link attribute LSA for OSPF v2, and we have the OSPF router information LSAs. We've kind of opened it up for general purpose usage, not just protocol usage. So we're basically, there's going to be optimizations like you saw in the data center for ISIS for different protocols and different ways of doing things. But as far as, you know, satisfying requirements for information, there's going to be a lot of similarities. So I'm not saying I'm all for it, but I'm less against it than I was in the past. I think it might work now. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So anybody have any thoughts on that before we start the meeting?
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think it's a good idea, and I think the benefits will show up long term more. I mean, it's difficult to say, you know, in 6 months there'll be solid benefits, but over 2 years, I think it'll be an obviously good idea.
Do you think the cross pollination and that aspect?
Yeah, and just the lack of, you know, replication of work unnecessarily, and things will then start to align better. Like AC's project for, you know, allowing alignment it'll be sort of obvious that, hey, we don't need two ways of doing this. It's we can align this without any real negative impact, and even the development will be happier with better alignment of the way it's done.
Okay. That was Chris Bowers for the minute taker. Okay. All right. Well, we'll get started. I'll start with your.
You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, these I can go pretty fast with these. The little thing. Slideshow app. There we go. Okay, next slide. Quicker. Oh, I don't have. I'll do it. I forgot. Is it hooked in? We don't have any. We haven't had any RFC since the last IETF. We do have this one. The tunnel end caps is all done, but it's waiting on the RFC queue on a reference to IDR tunnel attributes. So hopefully, the issues with that in IDR will be resolved, and we'll get that. There's actually a lot of IDR drafts that reference that too. So I'm hoping that gets published soon. Active working group documents. Whoa, it's moving by itself.
Is it? I wondered because I saw it moving.
Yeah.
Really forwarding it like that? Okay. Is that the slideshow aspect of it?
I don't know. Oh, I think it is. I think it's giving me only a couple seconds. Okay, just go to this one. Okay. We have OSPF v2, segment routing extensions. We've gone through a number of comments from Aaliyah, and it's addressed. And we had a discussion on this registry, what we're going to do with the algorithm. We decided to have a common IGP algorithm registry. And we're going to also have a higher level registry category. Right now we have OSPF parameters and ISIS parameters. We're going to have a higher level category for IGP parameters, and then as a sub-registry of that, this new one. Anyway, and I see Aaliyah. She's the one who's got to give it the go-ahead and say that all her comments are resolved. Yeah, it's working now. Extended LSAs. We just completed working group last call. Peter Senek has agreed to be document shepherd, so we're going to get the shepherd's report and send it to Aaliyah for her comments soon. As you know, we have a couple implementations, Nokia and Huawei of this one. Link overload, that's my next one. I think we're going to, working group last call, the next version of this. One change we made, or we're going to make, is we're going to put the reference into extended LSAs. At one time, we weren't putting the references into extended LSAs because we didn't know when we'd get that done, we're saying this will be handled in a future document. We don't have to do that anymore, since that's going to be a real priority to get extended LSAs published. Get this one work class called. This OSPF v2H bit, this comes along every like 5 years. I think we ought to just finish it. This is the one for you do stub router support where you absolutely do not use it as a transit, rather than just discouraging transit with the highest possible link metric. MSD signaling
Is the H bit? Where did the H come from?
host.
Oh,
There's a router bit and a host bit. So, I mean, it's hard to come up with unique names for bits.
Yeah, that wasn't that in the ISIS it was the hippity bit, right?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we already have the router bit, so I think it. I don't know if it comes from OSPF v3. I could look to see what it was. I can't remember. MSD signaling, that's maximum segment depth. I think this one's ready, but I'm waiting for Jeff Tensor and other offers to request it. The Yang model, I've requested a early review of this. I'm an offer on this one as well, this OSPF Yang model. It's quite, even with the base capabilities, we have a lot of, we had a design team with people from most of the major vendors, and I think we ended up with a lot of features in the base. And so it's a fairly big model, even without SR and some other things.
So did you say you were an author on that?
Yes,
But you're not on the ISIS, right?
I am on ISIS.
Oh, okay. So we did get Benoit, I think, ran a thing against the two, or no, one it was NMDA. The OSPF is ready, and ISIS is not.
Yes.
Do you have any update on the ISIS?
Yeah, I guess Stefan is in there. Stefan is in here. He has it. We can do that. I think it's not that much work. I don't know. Do we have that one in a Git repository? The ISIS. We've just been handing around changes. Yeah.
So we could do align the two.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. I think I saw in routing working group, and I saw some updates on the base MRT, and so I'm kind of waiting for that. Chris, do you have any comments on MSD? Whether you're going to request working MRT, yeah, not MSD.
So it'll need to be modified.
We do have remote people. So.
Yeah.
Well, actually, quite a few.
Chris Bowers, Juniper. This will need to be modified now that the timer sync parameter stuff has been taken out of it and made as just a common reusable attribute in an RTGW draft.
Yep, I know which one that was.
Right. So it'll need to be modified.
Okay. And this one's kind of set idle, the OSPF cross TE. This is so simple. This is just for TE, you're able to specify endpoints for either OSPF protocol, IPv4, IPv6 endpoints in either of the TE LSAs. OSPF v3, it hasn't been a priority to do this yet. I think we should, once we get OSPF extended LSAs, and hopefully somebody will implement this. I guess Nokia and Huawei have also implemented the OSPF v3 segment routing, so we should push that along. T attribute reuse, lots of discussion. It's now a working group document. OSPF LLS interface ID, we have an update today, and SR Yang model. We broke out for one thing, the OSPF Yang model was so big. And we broke out SR because SR seemed to be continued to change even after the OSPF, the regular OSPF model. Since the NDMA change, the regular OSPF Yang model has been pretty stable. Expired. I'm hoping we get this entropy label one back because we spent a lot of time talking about how it should be. I think this is Stefan's too, isn't it? This is the entropy label, OSPF entropy label signaling. That's your draft, right?
I just did so.
Oh, you're not editor. Okay. Maybe I'll send an email to the authors, see if I can ask what the deal is, because I think I'd like to get that one done, especially now that we agreed on all the meaning, all the semantics, and what we're advertising.
So, Stefan from Orange, maybe we just need to ensure that the last call in MPLS will succeed.
Okay, yes. And flow spec, I'm going to just actually, I'm an offer on this one. I asked the other offers, said they had a use case for this and they were going to implement this. They've kind of lost interest in it. I'm not going to do flow spec in OSPF unless there's somebody who's going to use it. So we'll just let that one die. Data center BOF. These by other working group, I mean documents in other working groups, not working group documents that I didn't cover. We have beer. I know I saw not too many people reviewed the beer draft instead of me. I'd encourage others. I think it's gone to the AD already though. Isn't it? Hasn't it? The OSPF beer draft?
I don't think sorry, Leonis. I don't think it's in my queue yet, but I'm expecting it very, very, very soon. And certainly it should be progressing well before next IETF.
Yes.
So feedback soon would be ideal. Same for the ISIS one.
Okay, there's only one other one I was going to ask you about. This one, we're waiting on you to verify that your comments are addressed.
Actually, no, we were waiting for Alvaro to finish up on the segment routing documents coming out of spring so that we could send them to the IESG as a bundle. Unfortunately, the ISIS one hasn't made that timeline. So that's annoying, but I am expecting to put the OSPF one on the telechat either this time or next time.
Oh, okay, great. Excellent. Okay, that's it.
We can, it's on my slides. If you want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's really the only one that I think you needed to see for sure. Of the rest weren't that, or just business as usual on the documents. Okay, I can do the next presentation.
Well, let me do my.
Oh yeah, you got yours. Sorry. You want?
Yeah. Where's mine? Okay. So,
Yeah.
I really need to get a PDF slide, a real PDF. We didn't do it well, did we? No one's left the room yet, so and only me and AC have talked. Well, Chris did too, but note well. I think I'm supposed to read out the boldface stuff. Participating with the IETF, you agree to the IETF process and policies. If you are aware that any contributions, something, do I really have to read this? Is covered by patents or patent applications, you must disclose the fact and not participate in the discussion. You understand that meeting might be recorded or broadcast. It is being recorded and broadcast, photographed, and publicly archived. All those things are true. So any and further information, you can see the list there. You can find the slides online to look at this later. Peruse its beauty. We already did agenda bashing, so I guess I'll stand up too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have two last call documents. Actually, we had one until about 4 this morning, and then I last called the reverse metric, so that's pretty cool. That one's been around for a while. I think everyone's had a really good chance to look at it, so I don't anticipate any problems with that. The other draft is the ISI segment routing, which was just mentioned. It was just updated. I don't actually know if that's all that was. Is that the last change to the document that we expect?
So when you say it was just updated, you mean in June?
June, yeah.
Okay, so when the update was made in June, there were a lot of changes made related to EROs.
Right.
I pointed out that something was removed, which wasn't, that I don't agree with removing, and I didn't get any technical objections to putting that back in. There's been no update, so it would be good to see what people think the current version of the draft is.
Well, right. So
Does the author group have a working draft that they could publish so we know what the current state of revisions is?
So I thought that they were going to put binding SID back in. I was pretty sure. Yeah, I thought it was back in.
So if you go back to my message from, say, June 30th,
this, you know what? It might be they might have republished this because I when I said latest, I didn't think it was that old.
Okay.
Was there one published in October? Maybe.
so no.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I just checked this before
Okay.
coming up
All right.
here, and
I did notice that it looked like two things were removed, ERO and one other thing.
the latest
the
version is
bindings.
June 19th, and so
Yeah. Okay.
it would be good just so I don't have to keep this on my to-do list,
Right.
and we don't have to.
Is there any? And you don't know? There's no objection to actually putting it back. It maybe was it removed by mistake? Okay. All right. Well, then, yeah, that's what we need to do. Right. Is get a new version published.
Yeah, so that
And-
we're all on the same page about what the current document is.
Well, I think technically the current document is whatever's published, right? Which sounds like it's lacking.
Yes. There was discussion in the OSPF case. So Jeff had a question. What about OSPF, I think? Is that correct?
Yes. So
I'll let you ask your question.
the removal of ERO was caused by Ali questioning usability of it, right? There's no implementation. No one is using it. This is yes.
And there was nothing describing how it was supposed to be used. It was, oh yeah, you can just use this.
And there was nothing described. Can you say that?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, so I asked that I questioned why the ERO pieces were in the document because they did not relate to any work that happened in the spring working group. And they said, oh yeah, you can do this stuff. But it was like, wow, you could spew these bits flooding, right? You can't, it had no information on when you might do so, what the architecture or semantics and handling of that information was. And obviously, we're not supposed to be defining mechanisms in the IGPs that aren't requested from the spring documents. The fact that the authors happen to be the same does cut down on the potential for interworking group friction, but it's still not appropriate.
So-
right? So that was my question.
So wait, hold on to the mic for a second.
Sorry.
So you've got the OSPF version in your queue or something, and and now Chris tells me that we're still figuring the ISIS one out. So now are we aligned here?
That is my question. I had tried to skim very briefly through the OSPF one looking for bindings and didn't remember it. One of the reasons I haven't put it on the telechat yet is I wanted to double check that. But
So
I would like to be really sure that they're both aligned, and I'd like to get the bloody things done.
Right.
So the fact that authors are not responsive and updating the document in 5 months is not an indication of deep activeness, even though we all know the stuff is out there being implemented and deployed, and the industry is kind of excited about it. It would be really nice to get it done through the IETF, unless we enjoy the conversations about how the IETF is too slow in becoming irrelevant. I mean, if you enjoy those, then we can have that. But otherwise, do the bloody work, please. Thank you.
So there's some semantical difference in the way binding SID used in SPF and SS. And so, Chris, are you unhappy with ERO removal, or what exactly you're unhappy about?
this is the most exciting document status update I've ever done.
So Chris Bowers again. It was I was very clear in the email just on June 30th about a particular sub TLV in the ISIS SR binding TLV. I don't know if I got the exact lingo right, but it's something along those lines. And that's needed in order to support an implemented application for context. using these labels for context mirroring. So we're okay with removing it from OSPF. However, so that's a separate issue for Jeff to take up. As far as I'm concerned, for this particular issue about basically invalidating up until draft 13, a standardized use of this, we're okay with removing it from OSPF and whatever's going on in OSPF. I believe, Shraddha, you've looked at that, and that's fine. It's the ISIS draft which removes something which we don't agree with.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless there's a good reason, I think it should be the same.
We had this discussion on the OSPF list.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason they are not is because with ISIS, the usage for context mirroring is already done. But it would be better protocol specification to have a specific TLB for context mirroring rather than just
I see.
the
Yeah,
binding
I see.
SID.
Okay.
So there is a good reason not
Okay.
to have them aligned,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
it's just practical to say, okay,
Right.
we'll follow this.
Back to SPF, I still think it was partially misunderstanding, removing complete binding seat rather than just ERO. But given that the document is in quite advanced state, and I think we discussed with AC, binding seat could be published as very small RFC next to it, just to bring it back. There are at least two use cases where binding seat could be used: the optical use case and the sub-padding.
Yeah. No,
I would hate to.
I
You
think
know,
we need the
to get
use
into-
cases documented too, because that was one reason we took it out. Nobody was using it.
Ketan Talavlikar, Cisco. So on the OSPF, whatever usage of binding seed was there, which is basically the ERO, they are the underlying TLVs. They are not applicable or not used anymore. So there was no need to retain empty container, which is what the binding seed would have been. And that's the reason which we have removed it. And there is really no push or to do that now in the spec. So we should take.
Okay.
No, we discussed it, and I think we are going to do it in a separate draft. Yes.
Yeah. So I think
Yeah,
we're clear. on
That's
this.
that's the part.
Right.
Yeah.
We're
And
not going to
on-
remove them from ISIS because we have legacy use, and
Yeah.
we are going to remove them from OSPF because we're going to publish a new draft which covers that new application.
That's correct. Yeah. Thanks.
Shraddha Agde, Juniper Networks. So the binding TLV from OSPF, right now there are no implementations. Nobody objected to removing of this. And of course, it will be useful for certain use cases like context mirroring and such. But then we decided there's no need to block progress of OSPF segment routing document for this. And we will write a separate document.
Sounds good.
With very specific use cases and describing how it's going to be used.
Cool. So, so I missed this.
Probably we should address both the use cases in one and then.
Or just put the remove definition of binding in short document.
No, I mean, I think referring to the usage cases and how it's used is important because it's such an abstraction, right? So having something about the use cases. So it'd be good if you and Shadra collaborated on it.
Oh,
Always better. One document's always better than two.
okay. So backing up, I missed this. We have a document that's misrefed on that segment routing, the L2 bundles draft. That one's over one IETF cycle now in misref. So yes, it would be good to get the segment routing one out. We have an adoption call for the advertising TE protocols, the enablement draft, as it were. I can sort of give an update on that. I have another slot though later, so I'll just talk about it when we get to the discussion because there's been support for and against the adoption. So we'll talk about that later. Oops. Wow, this is really super height sensitive. Okay. So we have a new working group document. That was the other half of that controversial thing. The TE app data draft has been adopted, and we have a new version of that. And that's being presented. That's the other one of the two presentations. We have some updates. The ISIS, as I mentioned earlier, the ISIS, Benoit has called out that the ISIS Yang model is not NMDA compliant. It should be. It's going to be, AC says, so that's great. The existing, we have the other presented presentation is on this new individual document, the segment routed flex algorithm. We have a bunch of updated individual docs. I haven't even read all of these. I must be honest. The Baker one is interesting to call out here, though, because that one was actually in an adoption call almost a year ago, and then it sort of went dormant. And David Lamplitter, I think I pronounced his name wrong, but just updated it. So that's how it got into that. And I think there's a new push on to sort of visit this work. So those, the Flexi, I'm not sure. The other two are data center related. They're just sitting there. But they actually were talked about in the data center that happened on Wednesday. And there's a docket of, the beer ISIS extensions is actually waiting for write-up now in the beer working group. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's a quick one. Yeah, graceful first. Okay, this is very new work. We got in a conversation. Sammy approached me, and we've been talking with Sammy, BJ, and Anchor about some cases they found where you could converge faster. What? Oh.
No, I mean, there's slides.
Oh, I don't.
It's not.
Is it the? Do I need to move the?
Yeah, it's like.
Okay, thank you. So this is very early on, and and I read about these two scenarios where graceful restart wasn't converging. Was waiting the entire grace interval before converging. In the conversation with VJ and Anchor, we decided, went back and forth a little bit. One of them is when you have no neighbors on an interface. In other words, it's a stub interface in an area, and you never receive your pre-restart LSA to check against. So in that case, it'll, if you just follow the spec, it will prevent you from converging. I mean, it won't converge, and you'll wait the entire grace interval, which the default, I believe, is 180 seconds. So what this enhancement would do is if you have an interface and you don't receive any OSPF packets, you would, within the dead interval, you'd assume, okay, this is a stub interface, and you haven't gotten the pre-restart LSA on any other interfaces, you would just say, okay, this area is converged. Now, what we're talking about now, and we're kind of early on, is making this a more general thing where if you have a number of triggers and you don't get your pre-restart LSA at all within an area, then you would assume that area is converged. What that means is, even though you're getting OSPF packets on some of these interfaces, you didn't have any full adjacencies, you don't have any routes or anything, so you have converged in that area. So we haven't changed it, but I'd like to make it a little bit more generalized and handle like cases where you had a neighbor, but for some reason you didn't form an adjacency, or you were in the process of bringing up an adjacency, or a couple of the other situations.
So in certain cases, if the other router is really busy with something, it may not be sending you. I mean, how do you decide what's the timer?
Use the hello timer. That's why, yeah, for the other one, we need more thinking because it could take longer than the dead interval to do the, to get, I think we'd have to do something like the dead interval plus,
Yeah.
there's no
I think
routers
anything
in
beyond
exchange.
that interval should be used because otherwise you might get false positives, right?
Yes, we have, I have some ideas on this. Kind of like the thing about when you can get rid of LSAs that are maxed aged. You never get rid of them until you don't have any neighbors in exchange state. So you could use some rule. We haven't gone through. I haven't talked to the co-authors enough to generalize this case.
Because anything, if you use a timer, anything less than dead interval, then that's
No, I wouldn't use less than dead interval.
Sure.
The problem is not waiting dead interval. It's waiting the grace interval,
Yeah.
which is 180, which is
anything
in
beyond
it.
dead interval should be. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Good. Thanks. And the second one is the situation where you have most people, although the two RFCs, the OSPF and V2 and OSPF V3 graceful restart, both say that you should terminate graceful restart if there's any topological changes. Most people default, and every implementation I've ever, you default to not doing strict LSA checking. Well, in this case where you're not doing strict LSA checking, we'll have some more discussion on this. You would still terminate graceful restart if there were more than one router restarting at the same time. Because there are situations where you can have an inconsistent data plane. And that's it. Right now, this is just an informational draft. I don't know if anybody thinks of other things that were missed from the original OSPF graceful restart drafts. That would be good as well. Thanks. Yeah, and we're not ready to ask for working group adoption yet. We're kind of still discussing these things. No, remember I sent you those updates. It's Kevin. Oh. The next one's Roger.
Hello, good morning. So this is an update. Yeah. Okay. Good morning. So this is a quick update on the LLS draft, LS interface ID draft. Oops. Just a quick update. It's actually a very simple extension, and that's really using the LLS to send the interface ID. This is already there. This similar mechanism is already there in OSPF v3 and ISIS, and we are proposing to do similar thing for OSPF v2. There were some concerns raised previously, so there is backward compatibility details added before the last IETF, that is with RFC 4203. We also have implementations available. They have been done using experimental code points currently. There are really no changes in the document, no other reviews or comments that we have received on it since the last IETF. What we are asking for is really early IANA allocation code points, because we have implementations today with experimental, and we'd also like to request a working group last call. very short.
Okay, yeah, I'll say. I was just going to say, does anybody have a reason why we shouldn't request IANA early allocation? Okay, we'll do that first. I mean, try and get a little more discussion. Maybe we've had enough discussion, but there's a number of other ones. The reason I wouldn't working group last call, I'm really trying to get some of this older work done first. But after that, this would be in the queue of ones we're going to try and get through the process.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the IANA allocation would really help us go forward. Yes.
You want to fire them all? I guess. Yes.
Okay, so back to ISIS. Doing the the flexible. Yeah. Shada. Oh, this is how I got into trouble last time. Okay. I'm back here. And over there. Here you go.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about the flexible algorithm definitions in ISIS. So a couple of IETFs ago, we presented separating routing planes, and the solution we used was to use the algorithm field in the segment routing SID advertisements and advertise separate SIDs for each algorithm and then use it to separate routing planes. So this is an extension, and this has a generic application where we are trying to address multiple use cases using a similar mechanism. So we'll see what problem space we're trying to address. So we need ability to create different paths in IGP using different metric types like TE metric or extended TE metric. Separating routing planes is one of the use cases, and another use case is to create constraint-based path in IGP. This is like you can use constraint-based paths within IGP without having to use any other signaling protocol like RSVP. So the high-level solution is to advertise prefix sets based on algorithms. So this algorithms, the specific algorithms could follow different metric types to construct paths. For example, you could use TE metric or you could use extended TE metric. So algorithm space is divided into two separate parts. One is standard based, which will have IANA allocated and standard defined algorithms. And then the second one is 128 to 255, which is user defined. So user can define his own algorithms and then on every node configure the same algorithm and use it for advertising sits as well as computing paths. So in case of user defined algorithms, it is necessary that all routers must consistently define these user defined algorithms. So to make sure that in case there is a configuration mistake, there's a possibility of loops in the network. So to prevent that, there is a new TLV that is defined, which is called the flexible algorithm definition TLV. So there are two uses of this TLV. One, you can every node can advertise this sub TLV, and then every other node in the domain can compare the definitions and then decide if there is a conflict. There's another use case where it is advertised as a top level TLV, where where a central controller tells all the nodes in the network to use this definition for this particular algorithm ID. So in the second case, there can be definitions on the local node or not, or there may not be definitions. So the definition of the flexible algorithm definition TLV looks like this, as shown. So this can appear either as sub TLV of router capability TLV. So this is the case where it's the first use, where every node advertises what its definition is.
Shraddha, how is it for the user-defined algorithms? How is it identified in the sub-TLVs? I read the draft, but I can't remember. Is it a string or like let's say you pick some user-defined code point for an algorithm, like whatever in that range.
Let's say 100.
Yeah. How do you know that 100 means the same things on all the guys advertising? Is that something that's up to the administrator of the domain?
Yeah, when it is used as this sub TLV as of a router capability TLV is for advertising what I have configured on my node.
Okay.
And then when it goes on the other node, he compares whether the metric type is same. Let's say algorithm 130 is configured on my node, and it says I will use TE metric as the metric type for this algorithm.
Okay.
And then I can also have sub TLVs where we can define constraints.
Okay.
And then this is advertised in this sub TLV of router capability as my capability, that this is the definition on my router. And then when other node receives this, he's going to compare whether the metric type is the same, and then the constraints are the same.
Okay. So actually, can I ask you, we have a lot of time, so is this giving a sort of a two-dimensional aspect to the earlier value you discussed, the user-defined value? So you're getting one value earlier, and then this is sort of saying it's this metric and this algorithm?
No, it's just giving you a flexibility of defining, not making it standardized. Like I can say 130 in certain network can say 130 is metric type T metric. Some certain other domain, like certain other networks, can use 130 with metric type as extended T metric.
Okay.
And constraints could be different. So,
but it's not talking about different algorithms also? It's just talking about the metric type?
it is different algorithms. So you can have 130 as with T metric, 131 as.
So yeah, so it's two-dimensional. Okay.
I don't know what you mean by two-dimensional, but
you can vary the metric type that it uses, and you can vary the algorithm.
It's not only metric type. You can also vary the constraints. So there is also a sub TLV for constraints. So like 130 can say exclude red links, whereas 131 can say same metric type, and 131 can say exclude blue links. So I don't know if you can call it as two-dimensional, but it's a flexibility to
I mean, is the point is the perceived need that it's just too hard to standardize this stuff? So we need to be to move faster. We need this mechanism.
Because constraints you can't really standardize, right? Like exclude red, can I really standardize it, right?
Oh, I see. It doesn't all map to the earlier value.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the sub TLV of router capability TLV, where a router advertises its definition, its configuration. And here are the details. So there is an algorithm ID and there's metric type. Right now, only these three metric types, SPF or extended T metric and T metric, only three values are supported right now. And we could extend it as and when there is a need. And then there are also sub TLVs. Sub TLVs we'll see later in a later slide. They are mainly used for defining the constraints.
Ask a clarification question. Yeah, hi, this is Dhruv from Huawei. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah. So one thing while I was quickly going through the document, that's something I realized that in PCEP, we have done like objective functions and we have a way to identify the metric type. So I would say that if you could refer, like instead of redefining those things, because as you were saying, constraints, how do you optimize, those things have been there in PCEP for a while. So maybe you could refer.
Yeah, sure. So what do we do when there is a conflict? So let's say a router advertises its flexible algorithm definition TLV on the other router when it receives and compares its algorithm ID with other routers, and there is a conflict. Then it must not compute and install path for that algorithm, and it should also stop advertising support for that algorithm. This is to prevent loops. So in case of configuration mistakes, like on one router you say 100 is exclude red, whereas on the other router you say 100 is exclude blue, then you flag this and then you don't compute paths for this.
So Will Hallivuori from Coriant, isn't that bit heavy-handed? So one misconfigured router can mess up your whole area. So perhaps you could just exclude the nodes that have...
Yeah, the router which detects the conflict will stop computing for this algorithm. See, basically the idea is to prevent loops and mishandling, right? I mean, if one router does some mistake, it's SPF computation, right? I mean, everything can go wrong if one router does something wrong.
Doesn't this definition mean that every router will stop advertising this algorithm permanently?
This is typically what we do when we can have a loop. We revert to the base behavior. I mean, this isn't new for this draft.
Yeah, so basically, right, if you don't have path through this particular algorithm, you could still fall back to your normal IGP. But then putting traffic on this and looping is worst case, right?
Or you could try to calculate only across those nodes that share the same definition.
Well, can you state your name and affiliation? I didn't catch it either.
Yes, so Will Hallivuori, Coriant.
Okay.
Ketan Talavlikar, Cisco. I agree with this proposal. I think it's better to stop the algorithm and fall to the base than try to detect and avoid nodes and things like that.
See, the issue with just detecting the mistake with one router, so there's a router which is advertising. You have to compare your configuration with every other router, and you don't really know which all routers you have this conflict with, right? So whenever you don't know whether you are right or you are wrong, right? So the moment you find some conflict, then you just stop it, and then the other router also finds the conflict and he will stop it. So it's the same. I mean, even if you say when I recognize the conflict, I only stop. Every router is recognizing this conflict, right? And then because he doesn't know, the router who is recognizing doesn't know whether I'm right or I'm wrong, there's no other way. I mean, you have to stop.
And it's not like we don't need to hyper optimize for the situation, right? We're just detecting a misconfiguration. If you're an operator, you're going to get an alarm somewhere that you've got this misconfiguration and you're going to fix it.
So the leaking behavior is sub-TLVs are not leaked across levels, but we are going to say, we say that algorithm must be same across all the levels because we don't really see a use case where algorithm definition needs to be different across different levels. So another possibility is advertising flexible algorithm definition as a top level TLV. This is required because it's laborious to go and define this algorithm on every router. Like if you have constraints to go and configure this on every router is a lot of work. To avoid that, you have this centralized controller or a central node where you can do the configuration once and advertise it, and every other router in the network will use this definition to compute the paths for that algorithm. So in that case, this is advertised as a top level TLV, this flexible algorithm definition TLV in ISIS. So there could be local definition in this case, or there may not be local definition. In case there is a local definition, it's going to compare this top level TLV, and then the conflict detection would happen. But if there is no local definition, then the receiving node just accepts this configuration and uses it for computation. So the conflict with local definition, the behavior is same as we described before. And then there is this, because this is the definition that is being pushed onto the routers, we need it to be leaked across levels and then be same across all the levels. So the leaking behavior is controlled by the SND bits. So how do we do the computation for flex algo? So there's going to be a separate SPF computation for each algorithm. And in case of conflicts, we should not compute paths for that particular algorithm which has conflicts. The way we do it is the nodes, so every node advertises what algorithms it supports. This is as part of SR algorithm TLV. So nodes that do not support the algorithm are pruned from the topology, and then the metric type that is specified by the FAD TLV or sub TLV is used for computation. So any exclude link advertisement in terms of through sub TLVs, that should be honored. And then other restrictions for SPF is followed as normally. And then exit L1, L2 router is based on the best path. So some of the advantages of this using this flex algorithm, right? So with a single SID, you're able to get traffic engineering paths within your network. So generally, if you use SRTE, you have to have multiple labels and build up a stack and then use that label stack to forward the traffic. This mechanism is giving you a single label which can be used to get traffic engineered paths. So, so you have to have per node configuration of flexible algorithm and constraints, and there's also a mechanism to avoid extensive configuration by use of top-level TLV. So there is inter-area and inter-level support with IGP route leaking. I mean, you can easily get an inter-area or inter-level path using flexible algorithm with just one TLV, one label. Whereas using SRTE, you would need multiple labels. And if you want to use RSVP and such, the inter-area or inter-level would be a difficult thing to achieve. So, any other questions?
Kunal Orange. Can you come back to the slide with the TLV definition, please?
Which one?
Yes, that one. So in theory, to compute a path, you need the topology. So for example, the metric, the topology. So your exclude TLV, the metrics that you want to use to compute, and also the algorithm that you're going to use. And with SR, we have the field for algorithm. Currently, I believe we have 2, SPF, strict SPF. Maybe we have some for MRT, I don't know. But maybe what is missing is that you reintroduce an algorithm field. For example, if you want to compute strict SPF for based on latency, you cannot do that because you cannot re-specify the strict SPF algorithm within your TLV.
Yeah, so we don't really reuse the ones which are standardized. So there are 2 categories. Standard-based 0 to 127. We don't use those for user-defined algorithms. So user-defined will be only from 128 to 255. So the algorithm ID space is segregated into 2 categories. One is IANA standardized, and the second one is user-defined. So
okay, let's
flexible algorithm will use only the user-defined.
Okay, so I want to create a user-defined one, which is strict SPF based on latency metric.
No. So the algorithm ID for this will be 140, maybe you say, and then metric type will be, because if you say 0, metric type is always IGP metric. And if you want to use TE metric, you have to say you're going to use an algorithm which is 140 in your network, and then say the TE metric type for this algorithm 140 is extended TE metric or whatever.
Yes, but you're forbidding user to define to use a new algorithm, a standard-based algorithm with a user-defined metric. I'm not sure why you want to introduce.
So if you really
restriction.
want this to be standardized, then that is possible. The computation and other things will remain same, but you have to go to INA and get it standardized. Like algorithm 2 means a strict SPF with metric type as whatever you want as a metric type, right? Like maybe extended key metric. If you want it standardized, you really, it's not going to affect this draft as such. Only thing is you would need a separate draft to go standardize those values.
It's not for standardized, it's user-defined. But in addition to defining the metric and the sub-topology, it could be useful to also advertise the routing algorithm.
I think you're saying that it's not really useful to have user-defined because you anyway.
No. I'm saying that. Yeah.
So, Ketan Talaulikar Cisco. So, what you say is possible to do with Flex Algo, and the way I would say is strict SPF means we want to follow the SPF. We don't want to do any auto route or IGP shortcut. So, by definition, the algorithm follows the paths. So, that's not going to go over something like auto route. So, all we need to do is, let's say, pick 130 and pick T metric. And there is no, no IGP shortcut or no auto route coming into picture for these Flex algorithms. It's for us to define the algorithms.
Stefan from Orange, maybe to answer to Bruno. For me, this is not really an algorithm. What you are putting here is constraints. So to answer to Bruno, an ID could be to have, in addition to the algorithm, a kind of user-defined constraints that will map to your TLV.
Yeah, so we do have sub-TLVs where you can put your constraints, right? So this is sub-TLV of.
Yeah, but globally, all that you are defining here are constraints. So what we can do is to keep the existing standard algorithm, so SPF, strict SPF, and add something in addition to this, which is what are the constraints that I want to apply to this particular algorithm.
So you want the constraints to be global definition?
No. You can keep a user-defined constraints like you have, but it's in parallel of the algorithm.
So in the sub-TLV of flexible algorithm, you do have user-defined constraints, which can go along with the algorithm to say.
But you are, as Bruno mentioned, today you are overriding the algorithm. So you cannot combine the SPF or strict SPF or any kind of algorithm plus the constraints.
So you're saying for strict SPF you define constraints? Is that what?
Why not? Yeah. We need to decouple because it's not an algorithm that you are defining here. It's just constraints that you are adding.
Oh, so you're asking decoupling of algorithm with the constraints.
This could be an idea.
Yeah. Think about that.
So this will probably help for a few people to say, suppose that we were to define an MRT algorithm in segment routing in the 0 as 4 and 5 or MRT red and blue. I think being able to reuse those in your combination of in an algorithm or in a algorithm constraint combination in the higher range, in the user defined range, would be useful. I think that's what Bruno is suggesting, that allow more flexibility to have your user defined algorithm and constraints be a combination of a standardized algorithm, which are down in the 0 to 128 range, and constraints. That's the general idea, I think.
We can think about it. Yeah, sure.
One option is just to add an algorithm, a standardized algorithm field in your existing sub-TLV.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
But there is also a way to do. Yeah.
Stefan again. To come back to what Drew said, I think it's really important as we are defining constraint to be aligned with what has been done in the traffic engineering area. Maybe, I don't know if it's necessary or not, it's just an idea. Maybe we can make it completely flexible to be able to add existing T objects or something that are reflecting constraints.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I had one more. I was just typing some of the minutes. I would have told you guys before, but I read it on the plane. I thought of one more conflict you need to handle. What if you have a multi-home prefix and different IS routers advertise it with different algorithms? And so you're going to compute it multiple times. You'd want a precedence of these algorithms, or some way to handle this case where the multi-home prefix is advertised with different algorithms by different routers.
Yeah, sure. We can think about that. Handling.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I had one more thing. It's not for Shradra. I actually reviewed the patent application for this one, so I know there's IPR on this, and I'm obligated to say it. It just occurred to me as well.
Note well.
Yeah.
Okay, AC, I think you're up next. So AC's been thrown to the lions, I think. He gets to talk about the update of this T attributes per application draft. I'm looking at it. Hang on.
Okay. If anybody's unfamiliar with this work, you've been asleep for the last year and a half. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, I do. Oh yeah. I'm going to go through the summary of changes. Like Chris said, Les was going to give this, and he's not here. He is on MeetEcho, so perhaps he could chime in on questions and comments. Well, you know, the biggest thing, it was adopted as a working group document. The algorithm list was extended of standard algorithms, and we got some comments on, I think it came with respect to the OSPF version of this, on what about some of these other bandwidth things and how do they relate. And that's been covered in the draft. And the supported attributes are revised. Okay. The flex algorithm, which you just saw, has been added to the list of standard algorithms.
So that raises an interesting question I have. So this is a working group document, but we're talking, is it, do things get on that list? I can't remember. Was it IANA allocated or?
No.
Yeah, so it's being added into the working group, a working group document, even though it's an individual work. That's an end run, right?
Yes, you should. So that doesn't get lost. You should put that to the list.
Yeah, so that can't just happen.
Right, right. Also, a flex algorithm could mean different flex algorithms. So that's also an open discussion as how it's applied.
This must be the most controversial draft that's ever existed in ISIS.
I wouldn't say OSPF. OSPF, we had the Monet drafts. So. Okay, for application enablement, there was a lot of discussion on this, and this draft takes a stab at solving this. For the RSVP TE, it's consistent with the legacy. It maintains the same model as today. If the attributes are appletized for TE, it means it's enabled. For the other applications, it has no bearing in the newer applications. SRTE, the advertisement of attributes for that application doesn't mean it's enabled on the link. The same with LFA and flex algorithm.
There was one that was added, I think, going over the diff, I think there was one other one that was added that was, I didn't see it on this list in the slide, but I thought there was one other that was added that was then, had an implicit enablement, not just the RSVP. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm not, we'll have to check that. Right, and this was based on the comment, the handling of these three algorithms, I mean, these three attributes was also added to the draft. Maximum link bandwidth, maximum reserved link bandwidth, and unreserved bandwidth. The maximum link bandwidth is algorithm independent. And the maximum reservable, there was a lot of discussion and decided it could be applicable to multiple applications, whereas the unreserved bandwidth could not. This all happened within the last month, this discussion, or actually the last 3 weeks. And to continue the discussion, and hopefully early allocation of code points.
Yeah, so the next slot we're doing is just basically discussing the enablement that's in here. So I think we can discuss the general aspect of enablement there. What I would point out here to take away from the changes related to that is that this new version is proposing to use what we had before with RSVP, but in a well-defined manner. In other words, the presence of the data, which is now identified with the application, is going to implicitly indicate enablement if that's required by the protocol. That's the solution being proposed here. The other solution on the table that is an adoption call right now is an explicit mechanism that decouples the data from the enablement. Right? So instead of having the data imply the enablement, we would have a TLV that indicates whether something is enabled or not, regardless of what data is available for that application. Okay, so, right, why don't we just get into that? Is there any more questions on anything else about this draft? Okay, so let's see if we can stir up any discussion.
Hi, this is Dhruv from Jabber. Regarding the previous presentation, Jeff says chairs should consider flagging that to the list that is regarding the IPR and make sure that the IPR button gets pushed on the draft in the data tracker.
Okay. That on the flex, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so, all right, so some interesting things happened, right? So the last IETF, not to get into too much of sausage of what it looks like, watch sausage get made. We had all the authors sit down, and there was a real clear agreement that we weren't going to do enablement with the TE app draft. Everyone in the room, I think, clearly saw that we could continue with the implicit method, but we agreed to not do that. So this is a reversal of the authors on that draft. It's a flat-out reversal of what they stated. That's okay. It doesn't have to be pretty, the mechanism, right? As long as we end up with the right technical answer in the end, right? And it needs to be based on the technical merit of the solution and not the whatever else. So that said, we've had the adoption poll, and so I can read without bending my neck. The main points that I think that I've gathered in support of adopting the hedge TE enablement draft is that it's better to be explicit than implicit. And I think I would add to that maybe to decouple the two, the data and the enablement. I mean, that kind of is the same thing, but just to make it clear. And the case against that has been mentioned on the list, or I've gotten some private email, was that we just continue to use the thing that's worked so far, worked in quotes, but now we're going to fix the problem because we're labeling the data specifically for RSVP. So now when we imply that RSVP is enabled, there's no confusion, right, like there was before, because we're now identifying the data. So it's better at having that implicit thing. Yeah. So that's the reason against it, is that we don't need it because we could just do it the old way. So I sort of had three questions about this. I think we need to ask ourselves: is do we see a need to advertise locally advertised data for a link, and we don't want to enable on that link, right? I mean, if we can see that case, then we need this draft.
I have one case where you don't, for LF8, the answer to that is application specific.
Right. Well, so I think the authors of the TE app draft covered the LFA. They said it was a local define, right? So you define it in configuration. It's not something that needs to be advertised. Exactly. Right. And I mean, that's true. The LFA it's a local decision, right? So, but this is worth thinking about, right? Because this gets to the crux of it. Do we ever need these things to be separate, right? If we have a case right now, the decision to adopt this work is easy. We need it, right? If we don't have the case, then the question is, will we? Can we imagine it? Is it something we need right now? The other question I think we need to ask when making the decision on adopting this is, can we imagine deploying only one of these, and particularly this one? Can we imagine a case where we deploy just this one and not the TE application one? I can imagine that because I guess this solves this problem of disambiguating when RSVP is enabled or not. But I think that the authors of the other draft would say, hey, but we need to identify this data anyway, and we can kill two birds with one stone with our draft. So I don't know. So I think but it's worth thinking about. If you can imagine deploying only one, or only needing one. And then I guess the third thing is, this has been very controversial. Do we really have a problem that we're solving that needs solving, right? Or can we just table this? I mean, is it needed? Or do the networks already work? Is there a problem out there? I'm asking that question. Yeah, like, have we run into this problem? And
by tabling it, do you mean Chris Bowers, Juniper? By tabling it, do you mean tabling both drafts?
No.
Okay, because I mean these questions would better be asked with both of the documents not being working group documents, right? Because it seems to imply that since this one's already a working group document, we're stuck with a way of moving forward. So I would say we need, at this point, in terms of usability, we need the, let's say, TE enablement version of the draft HEGDA, TE protocols, more than the ability to advertise different values of TE attributes for the same link. Okay, and so asking this question of, can you imagine deploying only one of the drafts? Yes, I can certainly imagine only deploying the TE protocols draft because there is no good demonstrated use cases of needing the same value for the same link for different applications at this point. I've tried to come up with them. You might be able to come up with something related to SRLGs, but that part has not been laid out here. So that's my take on this.
So stay there for a second. So in this case, we're talking about sort of clearing up the ambiguity of whether RSVP is enabled based on the presence of the values that are there, right? Because like in your table, you have the table of how, different vendors make that determination and how it's different for different vendors, right? So you're saying you see the need to do that.
If we're solving that problem, which is a demonstrated problem, that's why we originally published that draft, it is perfect. I mean, that draft is predicated on just deploying that draft, and it solves the problem, and the multiple values for the same link for different applications is a theoretical problem at this point.
Yeah, okay, so my second question isn't going to help at all. The first one might.
Aliyah, no, I think your second question is useful. As the point that I would like to make is, and we did this as an oops, which I talked to you about for the other, we have a working group which is looking at TE, and TE's looks beyond just the kind of MPLS, IP layer that frequently we think about in this working group. And there's a lot of optical and GMPLS related and so on technology that's also impacted by this type of a change. No?
No, it is not. Because that's in the OSPF, and we're not changing that.
I got concerned feedback, and I'm happy to hear if that's not the case. Not in regard to this draft.
Put it to the list, the OSPF list.
I think it was a case of T's saying we should have been involved a little bit.
Yes. And I'm not trying. They were not making a big point of it. We had that other piece of the discussion. I just want to make sure that if we're talking about this, and I don't know, if nobody's interested in I saw the same stuff that's happening on the mailing list for working group adoption calls. If no one in the room or on the list is excited about it, then that's an obvious answer, and it doesn't matter. If we're looking at the use cases, then I just want to make sure that we don't accidentally focus only on those in the room in the mailing list, in this working group's mailing list. That's absolutely all. I'm happy to have whatever conclusion comes to happen.
Yeah, so maybe we can reinterpret the second question, and I'll give you the thought behind where my brain was when I thought it, and that was I was thinking sort of as a vendor in that case, and then as an operator, right? So which one of these drafts is actually going to get implemented by a vendor, right? And because the operators say we need this. I think it's worth thinking about it from that context, right? Let's do useful work. Because the honest truth is that both methods work, right? Both methods solve the problem. There's nothing technically wrong with, technically they both solve the problem of determining whether RSVP is enabled on the link. So now, as a working group chair, I'm looking and saying, okay, I've got a fight going on right here, right? I've got people fighting with each other over which solution to use, and I'm supposed to, get the working group to make a technical decision. So, they both technically work. So this is the first time this has ever really kind of happened to me, where I've had two people fighting, both had technical solutions, and the group was evenly split. So any help on that too, if you have any.
Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. I think ability to flood application-specific values and do that is also a problem that we are trying to solve. It's not just the enablement part.
Right. Well, so but that goes to my question of, is it? So yes, it's a problem we're trying to solve. Operators asking for this, or is it a problem we've identified that's this is a better way to do it, right? Like I said, I wish I could just let the market decide on this one, right? The problem with doing it that way is that then I would say, okay, let's take the people we have in support of this, let's adopt this work, and let's move forward with the the enablement being solved by this and the application data being solved by the other, and then let the market decide which one or both, right? The problem is that now we have the first draft also, supplying the same solution or a solution to the same problem. So
it took us a long ways to get to this, and there were a lot of people that thought as long as we were doing this, we should do application specific values, and there were use cases. Maybe they weren't, pressing that they need the problem solved right now, but it seems a little bit strange to question that requirement, given where we've come from.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the TE application, right? But that's.
No, I'm talking about specific attributes.
Right. Yeah. So that little plant grew out of OSPF, right, and into ISIS.
Oh, I guess, well.
Right, because you guys had a problem in OSPF that needed solving, and you needed to separate these attributes. And then Les, I think, was the main driver saying, hey, if we're going to do it in OSPF, we might as well do it in ISIS too. So that's how we got here.
I don't want to put words, but I seem to remember Stefan saying it would be good to solve the problem of application specific as well.
Okay.
Stefan speaking. Yes, it may be useful. We don't have the use case. It's a potential use case, but as Chris told, it's theoretical now.
Yes. Right. Okay.
Right. So it left to our own devices, right? If we hadn't have had the pressure from the OSPF work, we would not have tackled this problem, I don't think.
Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. So we just heard about Flex Algo, right? And I think as that idea develops, we may see that as a use case for having this kind of per application signaling. There were some comments and all that. So I really think the working group draft just addresses that problem. So it's good to.
Yeah. Okay.
Plus the problem that we started with.
So the question number one, though, it would make my decision really easy if the answer to that was yes, right? If there were cases where we needed to enable something, but we didn't need to advertise data for it, that makes this a really easy choice, right? That means we need this new draft, this new work.
So I think in IETF we do have solutions, different solutions to the same problem, and then people pick and choose, and we standardize both of them, and then people pick and choose what they want to deploy, right? I mean, if the people are really interested in advertising per application attributes, then you have a solution, and if you don't want to do that, you have another solution. So.
Yeah. Okay. So
really
then we need. I see what you're saying. And so do we need to think then about? Are we going to have to write a draft on what happens when one is set and one is clear? I mean, like if they're both advertised and do you have now you have the data over here, but you don't have it in the enablement TLV, but you do have the enablement TLV, right? Now, I love leaving it to the market, right? I would love to be able to just say, let's do both, and let the money decide.
Because it's not only about, you need to think about the deployment. You need to think about how you're going to configure this, and how you're going to. If you don't need per application attributes advertisement, you don't have that use case. Why would somebody really think about all of this, right?
Yeah.
And so the draft that was adopted, actually, the TE app draft, does not do enablement for RSVP. There was a proposal put out on the list in the form of an updated draft after adoption, but I would say that that's still subject to working group approval as well.
Yeah.
So moving forward with both drafts, one solving the ability to advertise different values for the same link for different applications is fine, as the working group adopted it, where it doesn't address explicitly RSVP enablement.
Yeah. Well, so I'm not, just because there was an 03 version published that provided a solution for enablement, that's not going to affect whether we adopt here, right? Because if we think this is a good idea to adopt this draft, then we just reverse that over there.
Right, exactly. And so the issue of you mentioned, so we adopt both of them and let the marketplace decide. With that draft, the original version that was adopted by the working group, there's not any ambiguity to resolve, I believe. I mean, we would simply state in one of the drafts that the TE protocols, that simple explicit enablement mechanism defines what's enabled. If you happen to receive some values for a different application, ignore it. Very simple.
Yeah.
So I can easily see a world where we implement only the TE protocols draft, and this other one maybe gets implemented, maybe doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bruno de Crane Orange. I like your second question. It's useful. So advertising application-specific information is a theoretical requirement. So the question is, are we going to have a real implementation and widely implementation? If not, it does not solve the problem.
Right. Right.
And if yes, it looks strange to have a widely implementation of something with a theoretical requirement.
Yeah, yeah. So exactly. I mean, in other words, if we choose to use the app draft as the solution, we're implementing all this extra stuff to solve a simple problem.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, Stefan speaking. And in terms of implementation complexity, I think implementing the per application is more complex, will take more time, and have more bugs just to solve urgently the application enablement.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. The complexity level, though, I think is, yeah, it's not too, you know what I'm saying? One is easier than the other, but the other isn't that hard either. So, I mean, it's a valid point. But
implementing is one thing, but just deploying and dealing with bugs from, interop is a whole other issue. So yes, implementing, it's quite straightforward, either approach, but actually getting it out in the field and working in production is a whole other thing. Chris Bowers, Juniper.
Okay, so if moving forward, I think we're going to make a decision on this. It's not gonna be now, but I wanted to have one last IETF at least where we had a chance for people to get up to the mic that might not mailing list. I don't know, but please do give an opinion on the mailing list if you have one, and especially about these two questions. If you have an answer to these two questions, that would be useful.
I have a, in some ways, I think the whole enablement question is overrated, the complexity of it and which way you do it myself. But in terms of OSPF, there's a bigger question. So I think whatever goes on with the discussion of these two drafts, we want to go forward with the consolidation of the non-TE and non-GLPS and everything else in fewer LSAs, be it 2 LSAs for OSPF v2 or a single LSA for OSPF v3. So I don't want this protracted discussion in ISIS to have a bearing on OSPF.
And does it?
Some people seem to think. Some people just are very dogmatic and say, oh, of course we have to do the same thing in the two protocols. I'm not one of them, by the way.
Okay. I think that's all the comments that I'm going to get. You weren't here when we talked about the merging. We can recover that. That's all that we're going to talk about other than remerging for Alia's sake, or merging, not remerging. So what me and AC both said that previously we were very against the idea, and now we're not as much against the idea. it'll be interesting to go and contemplate what happened here during this meeting that we just held. I think there was a couple dynamic moments where it was useful to have everyone in the same room with the chairs both sitting up at the top. I also expressed that if I had to run the OSPF working group this time because AC didn't make it, that it would scare me. And what that implies is that there's a lot more work when you only have two chairs and the two protocols to do. So I think that that is something lost, right? Of having that. Now we both have to be experts in both protocols.
Atlas, yes, I hear you on the chairing work, and that's something we can discuss a bit offline. There's other ways of handling that piece as well. We have a number of working groups that actually do have 3 chairs, for instance, and there's flexibility there. There's going to be a learning curve for the intersection. But as the question I have for the room is, how many people would be here if this were only ISIS? Sorry, the question is, who would be in the room if this were the ISIS working group meeting? Okay. Who would be in the room if this were the OSPF working group meeting?
Who would be in the room in only one of the rooms? That looks like 0.
Right. Who finds it useful to have pieces that relate to many of the things when they relate to both protocols? Yeah, having it in a single place. Okay. Who has been bothered by having the working groups mailing lists merged for the last 4 months? Who noticed? Oh, good.
That was less than the number of people that raised their hand for who would be both in the same room. Right. So to that end, even I didn't. I'm not reading all the OSPF drafts. Right. I have been extra busy with other things during this last segment. But I wonder how many people out there would only be reading one protocol's mailing list.
So something bothers me. Seeing AC without face mask in SS meeting is unacceptable.
Okay. So I think, we're going to talk about it and figure out, because I do hear you on the chair bandwidth problem, but I also don't see the room being overly full for having a good conversation and having a working group with a good culture. ISIS has had a great culture as a working group, and so has OSPF. And I think that most of you are used to participating and being in both of them, even if we don't read all of the drafts. I do expect to continue forward on the path. Does anybody have objections to merging the 2 working groups, assuming we sort out the chair bandwidth issues? Okay. Does anyone have a good acronym name?
It's worth noting that there's some pretty heavy hitters who aren't in this room. Right?
Yes, but they're on MeetEcho, so they can participate.
But I'm just saying that.
I understand.
This poll also needs to happen out in other places. We're just getting a feel for the room, right?
We're getting a feel for the room. This, right?
It seems pretty unanimous.
Yeah. So I really do want to get everybody's feedback, but it's not a consensus decision.
Yeah.
Right. But I obviously care deeply that it's effective for the protocols. This is the backbone of the internet. This is, and not just the internet, but everyone's networks, and the protocols matter so much. And one of the points of merging the 2 working groups is to share knowledge and expertise and to grow the number of people who may be interested in participating and understanding. So if I can move on to a second topic, which is, of course, deeply critical for merging, we need a new name.
Link state routing.
Link state routing. So what about link state intradomain routing? Or are you wedded to LSR?
You're worried about like IDRIP or something?
No, because an LSR is a label switching router.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I don't
Swapping
care about the joke.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the joke's obvious, and that's perfectly fine. And I really do want link state and routing in there. I mean, that's right. It is important.
Intra-domain link state routing, ILSR.
Yeah, sort of like iPhones and iPads and everything else is.
Yeah, can we do it with a little I?
Yes, absolutely. We could do it with a little I.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
Okay.
that was the rough one I came up with. I don't know.
You know, I forgot the bribe. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but
But the problem with putting I in there is it, inter and intra both begin with an I, so it really doesn't add anything.
And it was originally, what was it, interior and
Exterior. Yeah, originally, yes.
Yeah, I don't like that. 'Cause
I don't
that's
either.
way too close to OSPF.
right. So you'll notice that we're very carefully not looking at acronyms that say are ISIS and OSPF routing or OSPF and ISIS routing. We're trying to up level it.
It should be noted. I don't know if everyone in the room knows this, but we've sent a few people to the FBI because they tried to join ISIS. So when we change our name, we'll no longer be finding terrorists for the government.
There are always unexpected side effects to decisions, right? All right. So LSR or ILSR.
Something.
Sorry.
Yeah. By the way, I tried IGP. Whoever said that, and it was shot down. The IGP. The problem was that it really does cover RIP, and there's a lot of.
So IGP isn't good because we're not doing distance vector. I mean, there's Babel, and we're not doing RIP, and there's some pieces in Manet that we're not doing, and I mean, not that Manet's working on them now, but IGPLS. I mean, the question is, how many syllables do you want to have to pronounce? Why don't folks, since we have a single list, why don't you send suggestions to the mailing list? And not that it's going to bias our decisions in terms of what acronym to use, but if you have a preferred bribe of chocolate versus booze, so that we understand the cost associated with the acronym, that would be useful too.
Well, we'll leave it for Tony to think up one that you can actually has a little hidden meaning.
Bug-free routing.
So, I mean, the real question is, are we trying for something that's pronounceable as a word? Are we trying for something that has an in-joke to the IETF? Are we trying for something that has meaning? I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here.
Yeah, although I'm gonna object to any kind of ridiculous acronym just to get pronounceability, like lemon drop or something, where we're picking random letters in the middle of words.
Since we never thought it would happen, why don't we just call it WTF?
So unless I hear something else, please send suggestions to the list. We'll continue to think about what you all want to name the merged group. But I expect to have this done before the next IETF. Transit.
Okay. I guess we're done, but there's a lot of things that a lot of these drafts, people brought stuff up that we should follow up on the list.
No, that's it. Jabber have comments? We got them. Link state route. That's where you're starting to grab letters from the middle. All right. Well, okay. What's the next one? London? Thanks a lot, everyone.
Hi. I talked to you on email, though. Yeah. Circle, right? Yes, that's what I thought. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I also.
Hi.
She works in Wards area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I have these two guys, and I can ask a question, and I'll get a response. Not immediately. So I got it. Sorry.